The night was overwhelming for young Miguel Santos, a poor boy from the streets of Manila who had only ever sung for spare change, but now he was standing in front of the glowing lights of America's Got Talent. The massive stage seemed larger than life, and the thousands of eyes fixed on him made his heart race, yet he held on tightly to the memory of his mother's words, "Sing with your soul, Anak, and the world will listen." His small hands clutched the microphone, and for a moment there was silence so heavy it felt like the whole world was waiting for him to breathe. The judges looked on with curiosity, Simon with his sharp, unreadable expression, Sophia with a warm smile, Heidi already leaning forward, and Howie with encouraging eyes. Miguel closed his eyes and began softly, his voice fragile but pure, like the first drop of rain on dry ground. As the melody rose, so did his confidence, and his voice grew powerful, filling every corner of the hall with raw emotion that seemed too big for his small body. Gasps rippled through the audience, people leaned forward in their seats, some with tears already forming. The more he sang, the more he seemed to transform, no longer a poor boy in tattered clothes but an artist born to stand on that very stage. The crowd erupted into applause mid-song, but he pressed on, pouring out every ounce of pain, hope, and dream buried inside him. By the time his final note rang out, the audience had risen to their feet, clapping and cheering wildly. Heidi wiped her eyes, Sophia pressed her hands over her heart, and even Simon's stern face melted into a proud smile. For Miguel, this was no longer just an audition, it was the moment his dream took flight. Backstage, Miguel could hardly believe what had just happened. Golden confetti still clung to his hair and shoulders as he sat trembling in his mother Rosa's arms. Tears streamed down her face as she kept whispering, "Anak, you did it, you really did it." The roar of the audience still echoed from the stage, and every cheer seemed to echo the struggles they had both endured, long nights in the streets of Manila, days when food was scarce, and times when Miguel's only comfort was singing to forget their hunger. Terry Crews knelt beside them with his big smile, holding Miguel's tiny hand in his, saying, "You're a star, young man. The world saw you tonight." Miguel's chest rose and fell quickly, his voice barely steady as he said, "I sang for my mama, and for everyone like me back home." Rosa kissed his forehead, remembering the years when she thought her son's dream was impossible, and now here he was with the golden buzzer shining like a miracle. In the distance, they could still hear Simon telling the audience that Miguel's voice was one of the purest he had ever heard, and those words felt like a crown placed gently on the boy's head. The crew members rushed over to congratulate them, some even tearing up, moved by the sight of a boy who had carried so much pain yet sang with so much hope. Miguel looked at the stage one last time, the floor still glittering with gold, and he whispered softly, "One day, I'll sing for my whole country." Rosa squeezed his hand tighter, knowing this was only the beginning. For the first time, Miguel felt like the world had truly opened its doors to him, and he was ready to step through with courage. The next morning, news about Miguel's breathtaking audition had spread like wildfire across the Philippines. In Manila, neighbors who once saw him singing on street corners gathered around small televisions and phones, replaying the moment he received the golden buzzer. In Cebu City, local singers spoke of him with pride, saying he carried the voice of every Filipino dreamer. Even in Davao, strangers who had never met him felt connected, sharing clips of his performance with captions like, "This boy is our pride." Meanwhile, in a modest hotel room in Los Angeles, Miguel and his mother sat by the window, still processing the sudden change in their lives. Rosa scrolled through countless messages flooding social media, people calling her son an inspiration, a miracle, a gift. Miguel, however, sat quietly with his guitar, strumming softly, as though grounding himself in the simplicity of where he came from. Terry Crews stopped by to check on them, bringing snacks and laughter, reminding Miguel that this was just the beginning of a long journey. "The world is waiting to hear you again," Terry told him with a fatherly tone. Miguel nodded shyly, but inside his heart raced with excitement and nervousness. He remembered the streets of Iloilo, where his grandmother had told him, "Your voice is a blessing, don't ever hide it." Now, that blessing had reached across oceans, touching millions. That night, before bed, Rosa hugged her son tightly and whispered, "Never forget where you came from." Miguel smiled and answered, "I won't, Mama. I'll sing for them, for all of us." With the city lights of Los Angeles shimmering outside the window, Miguel drifted to sleep, unaware that his life had already become a beacon of hope for countless children who still sang on street corners, just like he once did. Weeks later, the semi-final round of America's Got Talent arrived, and Miguel stood backstage clutching the microphone with trembling hands. The memory of golden confetti still lingered in his mind, but tonight felt even heavier. This was his chance to prove he wasn't just a lucky moment, but a true artist worthy of the world stage. The stagehands moved quickly, the crowd roared in anticipation, and Rosa held his shoulders firmly, whispering, "Anik, just sing with your heart. That's all you need." When Terry Crews called his name, Miguel stepped into the spotlight, the enormous stage glowing beneath his bare, nervous feet. The audience hushed instantly. As the music began, Miguel closed his eyes and released a voice more powerful than before, stronger, braver, layered with all the struggles and dreams he carried from the streets of Manila. Each note rose like a prayer, echoing through the theater with haunting beauty. The camera panned across the judges. Sophia was already crying. Heidi leaned forward with her mouth open in awe. Howie whispered to Simon, "This kid is something else," and for the first time, Simon simply smiled without speaking, his eyes shining with respect. Midway through the song, the crowd erupted in cheers, waving flags from the Philippines, showing Miguel he wasn't alone. He hit his final high note with everything inside him, and as it faded, a thunderous standing ovation shook the room. Miguel stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sight of thousands clapping and crying for him. Rosa cried backstage, hands covering her face, whispering thanks to God. Simon finally spoke, his voice steady, "Miguel, you don't just sing, you move hearts. That's what makes a superstar." Miguel's lips trembled into a shy smile as he bowed. In that moment, he wasn't just a poor boy from Manila anymore, he was a symbol of hope for an entire nation. The grand finale arrived, and Miguel felt as though the entire world was watching. Backstage, Rosa clutched his hand, her eyes glistening with both pride and fear. "No matter what happens, Anik, you've already won," she whispered. He nodded, his heart pounding, but deep inside he knew this performance was more than a competition, it was his story, his soul laid bare for millions. As the curtains lifted, a hush fell over the massive theater. Golden lights bathed the stage, and the first gentle notes of music floated through the air. Miguel began softly, his voice tender and vulnerable, painting images of Manila's crowded streets, the nights he sang for coins, the hunger he fought with dreams. With each verse, his tone grew stronger, soaring higher, carrying the weight of every child who had ever felt forgotten. The audience leaned in, captivated by the purity of his sound, until the final chorus exploded with raw emotion. His small frame shook as he belted out the last notes, and for a moment, time itself seemed to pause. The hall erupted, cheers, tears, flags of the Philippines waving proudly in the air. Sophia rose to her feet, clapping wildly. Heidi had both hands pressed to her chest. Howie shook his head in disbelief, and Simon, who so rarely showed emotion, stood slowly, clapping with a soft smile. The camera zoomed in on Rosa, tears streaming down her face as she mouthed, "That's my son." When the applause finally settled, Simon spoke firmly, "Miguel, tonight you didn't just perform, you created history." Golden confetti rained once again, this time not for an audition, but as a crown upon a journey fulfilled. Miguel bowed deeply, his eyes wet with tears, knowing that a boy from the streets of Manila had just sung his way into the hearts of the world forever.